We are back with Dr. Richard Scott, GP. Hello, Richard.
Andy, it's been a time, but great to see you again.
Yes, lots of things have happened. I've had heart surgery. You've been
Yes.
away. One or two things.
Well, I mean, that's a big one. I can't trump that.
I don't want to ever trump that. I'll be honest. But we are back talking about medical issues. So just in case you've missed some of these, the whole point of these sessions with Richard is we take topical news stories on mental health. So he's a GP or family practitioner in the States. So he sort of looks at it from the perspective of medical science, all that kind of thing. And we look at what God might have to say about it. And then every so often we do a Q&A. So you can send your questions to Dr. Richard Scott. I'll put them to him every so often. And today we have a new topic. So what are we talking about this week?
Well, it's hard to summarize it, but essentially it's to do with anxiety, the anxious generation, but also linked in with mobile phone use and the effect this might have on faith. So I'm going to try and weave these things together, again, based on an article that I've read and see where God fits into this.
Brilliant. Go for it.
So, yeah, thanks, Andy. So, yeah, a few weeks ago, we talked on happiness twice. And if you remember, it was work from a professor of psychology at Bristol University, sadly, in the wake of several university suicides. And he then thought, well, what can I do as a psychologist? And he produced this course on the 7 steps to happiness. Some of which are, give rather than take, go on long walks to get, if you like, to get out of your head, look at the stars, and particularly involve and don't negatively compare yourselves with other people. But one area which we mentioned but didn't spend much time on, which is where I want to go today, is control your attention. And what I want to look at today is a phrase, if you like, which I think will help our listeners. It certainly helped me. And it's called opportunity cost, the cost of everything that we do. So essentially what we choose to do in life comes with a flip side. If you choose one thing, often it's at the expense of something else. So, for example, since Andy and I last met, I've been on holiday in Spain just for 6 days. I say holiday, it was mainly looking after the grandchildren, and Spain was unbelievably hot. We were in the middle of nowhere. It was great. There was a pool, thank goodness. So I had a lovely time with my wife and we came home for a rest. But say I hadn't gone on holiday to Spain, I could have spent the money on a new shed or a flash bicycle, for example. So this is, if you like, the opportunity cost, the cost of taking an opportunity. But the biggest opportunity cost is probably one that we haven't thought of. It applies to the great majority of us. It doesn't depend on our age. It's nothing to do with ethnicity or gender. It drinks in time and money. It's a thing that we never leave home without. And of course, I'm talking about the mobile phone. What's the opportunity cost of a smartphone? And how does this somehow link into being a Christian? Well, I've come across this new book and it's called The Anxious Generation. Now, we know there's been loads of articles now, we've mentioned it on this show before, that smartphones connected with the internet can alter and are altering childhood and adolescence. There's compelling arguments that they affect children's mental health. But could they be damaging our opportunity to follow Jesus? Well, this book called The Anxious Generation has been written by another psychologist, but this time an American called Jonathan Haidt. Interesting name, but I'll tell you how it's spelled. H-A-I-D-T. So I may not be pronouncing it right. Maybe it's Haid. I don't know. Anyway, Jonathan, we'll call him. The interesting thing here is he is an atheist. He's not a Christian, but see what he comes up with. So he goes back to when the iPhone 4 came out. And that was apparently a game changer for those of you who are into mobile phones, because for the first time it had a front-facing camera, thus enabling selfies. And whilst, of course, it's nice to take photos of your holiday, say in Spain, or you've got a nice a meal out with friends, suddenly the opportunity to take a selfie changed everything and became very addictive. Of course, if you add that to having all the world's information at your fingertips on a smartphone, suddenly we spend all our time on smartphones and it's nosedived our mental health. So here he is, Haidt, this chap, Jonathan, in the US. And he says, we're making a mess of our kids. And you'll see, by the way, how this applies to adults. And based on what he had to say is what I'm going to move on to just now. He said, we've moved from an active childhood to, if you like, a play-based childhood. I mean, I don't know about you, Andy, but I used to love playing football. I go out in the park with my mates on their bikes, no phones in those days because I'm old, and we'd kick a ball around. We've moved from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood, and phones have become mobile babysitters. So the playgrounds are deserted. Not quite, I'm pleased to say, when I take my grandkids to the playgrounds. There are some kids there, but often they're on their bikes, but they've also got their phones, and they'll stop what they're doing, looking at their phones. And there's a strong link, we know, between adolescent self-harm and depression and suicidal ideation and social media and smartphones. Young women are crushed by the need to produce the perfect selfie. Boys get ensnared by pornography. And apparently, and this is interesting, both boys and girls as teenagers have agreed that life is increasingly meaningless. That I didn't know. So that's one thing I've learned today. So back to this chap, Jonathan Haidt's main point. He's talking about the opportunity cost of having a smartphone. He says there's 4 things we miss out on with a smartphone. Number 1, the sleep deprivation. If you spend more than 5 hours a day online, I understand that many people do, more than 50% of people will have difficulty sleeping because it affects our healthy development. Certainly more than 5 hours is a bad idea. Gosh, 5 out of 24. So sleep deprivation. Number 2, social deprivation. Failure to form and maintain real life, real world relationships, including romantic ones, I might say. Number 3, attention deprivation. Constantly distracted. Implications not only for schoolwork, but for our ability with proper work, if you like, in the future. And finally, addiction, which then exacerbates numbers 1 to 3. So these smartphones, he says, are affecting the fundamental elements of a good, healthy life. Now, I'm bringing this back to the Bible, but actually he brought it into the Bible. So here he is, this atheist. And of course, the famous New Testament story of being overactive and distracted was Mary and Martha. Mm. Those of you who, and I'm going to plug again, The Chosen, a wonderful series. When there's now 4 series of The Chosen, they're going to do 7 in total. They've just finished series 4. If you can look back, I don't know where it is on The Chosen, but if you look back at the Mary and Martha episode, oh my goodness, I think it's on series 4. Fantastically well acted, really making the point that there's Mary when Jesus arrives at the home, sits at his feet, drinking and everything he has to say. Martha's irritated. What are you doing? There's work to do. We've got to prepare a meal. And she gives Mary a hard time. Nicely acted out, I might say, on The Chosen. And she expects Jesus to take her side. Jesus says, listen, Mary's chosen the better thing to do. She's listening to me. She's focusing her attention on me. She's not distracted. Martha, you are worried. The Bible says you are worried and upset by many things. And what Jonathan Haidt is saying is that this is today's anxious generation, distracted and distorted, if you like, by these notifications, the apps that come up, the addictions. Could it be, he says, and he's an atheist, that these apps are taking kids away from church and even faith? Of course, he's talking to adults, I think, as well here. Remember that Jesus used to withdraw to lonely places and pray. Didn't say that. Now, would he have done so? Well, just imagine he was here today. Would he have had a smartphone? I think if he had gone to a lonely place and prayed, he'd have turned it off. He wasn't there to get distracted by bzzz on his phone or lights going on, notifications. He chose to get away from everything and get there and pray. And he tells his disciples, when you pray, go up into the upper room on your own so that only God sees what you're doing. No vibrating phone at their sides either. Now, as I said, this chap Haidt, and this is we're coming to land in a minute. This chap Haidt is a confirmed atheist. Yet he devotes an entire chapter of his book, The Anxious Generation, to spirituality. And as a non-believer, he argues that smartphones cause spiritual degradation because they're all about thinking about yourselves. I'm number 1. They're materialistic. They're judgmental. They're boastful. They're petty, with all the glory sought through followers and likes. He's clear. Our digital culture isn't neutral, but offers a kind of anti-discipleship. Now, his work is based on lots of research and data, and it upsets many. Many people don't like what he's written because it provides inconvenient truths. None of us want to put our smartphones away or tell their teenager to hand theirs over. Yet it may be that we need these radical interventions to prevent a social catastrophe. So here's 4 steps which he suggests. Number 1, no smartphones before 14. This is a challenge for us as parents and perhaps as grandparents. No smartphones before 14, no social media before 16. Number 3, phone-free schools. I know some schools are trying this. And number 4, an increase in unsupervised phone-free play. So play without school without phones, play without phones. And there's just a little thing for adults here. We're just going to add on at the end before I come back to you, Andy. Let's just remember that phones have an opportunity cost. Maybe they're a vice that needs taming. Number 2, this is what actually a Christian has written. Perhaps we shouldn't even use our phones for Bible apps. Nothing wrong with the Bible apps, but they're too packed with temptation around them. Number 3, create a phone-free space for youngsters, including within church. So there's a thought. And 4, just reassure youngsters that the Christian faith offers life in all its abundance. And perhaps we need to be role models and switch our phones off too, so that we can really focus on God in order that we might live this life abundantly. So a few thoughts from an atheist who comes up with spiritual answers.
I remember just recently thinking about particularly young people. There's two studies I've seen recently. One was about the amount of people who are finishing their A-levels in the UK. So that's about 18 years old if you're not familiar with the UK education system. So it's around 18, pre-university, and they're finishing school. And the increase of young people at 18 years old saying, "I am hopeless. I have no hope for the future." That is skyrocketing. So that's one thing. And the second thing I saw was a woman who did an experiment. Why are my children angry? So she started taking tablets away from them, increasing amounts of time, actually, as she went through this, not sort of an experimental thing.
Medical tablets, but tablets as in iPads.
Yes. No, not painkillers and, diabetes medicine. No. This was like digital tablets. And she started taking them away as an experiment. And as she experimented, she found they were angry, but actually the more she took off them, the more angry they got, until it reached a point as a sort of a threshold where the anger disappeared. And what she realized was the tablet actually is really not as helpful as she thought. It was a great learning device or great opportunity to learn how to do stuff, but she's basically taken them off her kids, saying there is no help that I'm seeing for my child's general demeanor.
Well, interestingly, I read another thing, which I haven't actually written down, but just in the paper this weekend, about how many parents will try and pacify, particularly the sort of younger kids, 5, 6, 7, with an iPad. Oh, just have a look at this, if you like, as a digital pacifier. And what it's been discovered, again, it leads to increased anger. Yes. So it doesn't pacify them. It might do at the time, but it has a long-term adverse effect of anger. And no parent wants that.
No, we don't want to generate anger in our children, not at all. There's a lot there. Just one term you use, which I just wanted to clarify for people. What's an adolescent? What does that mean?
So pre-adult. So it's the later teenage years, if you like, peri-adulthood, a bit like people who just before the menopause are thought as being peri-menopause, peri-adulthood. So perhaps 15, 16, 17, around that age.
I don't know, and I thought maybe others wouldn't. So I don't mind sticking my hand up and saying, I actually don't know what that term is.
That's all right.
Right. So let's work through this. No social media before 16. I don't know what the age is, but there is actually a minimum legal age for social media. I'm not sure what it is. I just know that it's there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, I'm not sure. But yeah, how is it policed? And we're really saying to parents, you're the number one policeman. We shouldn't just rely on, social media, big organizations, or even the police. You need to manage your kids. And no one's saying it's easy. But taking the easier way out and just letting them run riot for 5 hours plus on their phones will lead to, well, he says, catastrophe, disaster.
I suppose my thought on that one in particular about actually giving a child or young person a phone is, there are lots of advantages to it. It's good to know where they are. It's a good security, safety thing. As a family, we have a GPS app on all of our phones and we know where we are. So if there's a problem, and we have used it once or twice, I don't know where I am. Joe had a puncture on a bike and I just looked at her on the map and thought, and we drove to her. So there's some great things about it. On the flip side, you've got the issue of children with phones. And it's a bit like saying to your child, I'm going to drop you off in the middle of this darkened alley in the middle of the night. We know there's drunks and there's alcoholics down there and there's drug addicts and, there's axe murderers, but we're going to leave you here because I'm sure you're fine, because we can't see them because they're a bit further away. That actually is how I genuinely think about the idea of just giving a child a phone and saying, off you go.
Wow, that's a very interesting, a very good analogy, one I hadn't thought of. But yeah, isn't it true? I have come across it. I'll give you a couple of nice stories there from phones. True stories of well, a mobile phone could save your life. One chap literally was falling off the edge of a cliff, hanging on by his fingernails, and just managed to activate his phone. He was saved. But an even better one, and this comes from my Africa days. When we arrived in Tanzania in 1990, there'd been a story of because there were lots of big pythons around, and pythons will eat adults. Children are easier, and this python was squeezing a child, and unfortunately, the adults who got there in time managed to unravel it, and off goes the python. Python managed to get away. So did the child, thank goodness. But the best story on a mobile phone is somebody who had a mobile phone who was being squeezed by a python, set it off, and people got there in time. Bear in mind, you haven't got long.
No, they're pretty effective at what they do.
So I'm not totally anti-mobile phones. Those are very, very good uses of mobile phones, but the dangers are obvious.
I think it's this issue of entrusting our children with decisions they're not ready to yet make, because it's a really simple example, but the reason why you hold your child's hand going across the road is you're 5-6 foot, they are maybe 2-3 foot. Their perception of speed is completely different just because they're shorter. It's got nothing to do with ability. The fact they are 3 foot, 4 foot shorter means they can't judge speed as well. That's just a really simple example, but you can, expand that as much as you like. But that's just a reality of children need adults. And if we don't use mobile phones sensibly, then all of a sudden we've got issues further down the road, a bit like what I was saying with the hopelessness. We know that one of the Instagram was it directors or CEOs quit, and the reason was, she said, we know that our algorithms are targeting young girls to make them want to stick with us, but it makes them depressed. And that was one of the reasons why I read that she left, because actually it causes so many issues.
Yeah. And when people say, big statements, there's no evidence, or, we're doing our best when they aren't, it's dishonest. And so well done for her to if you like, to pull the rug out from under them.
There's so much in here, isn't there? I remember when I was 18, I had a mobile phone because where I lived, it was cheaper than a call box. It was that simple. It was just a mathematical thing. I could chat to my now wife, and we had phone calls because it was cheaper with a mobile phone than a call box. We used to talk loads. We still do. That's never changed. And my boys have got mobile phones, and we've taught them how to do stuff. But you either say, well, there's nothing I can do, so what can I do? That's not a solution. You either rip the phones off your kids and you're going to have serious issues with your relationship with your children, or you kind of go for a middle ground of, let's have a conversation about how this actually can work safely for all of us in the family.
Yeah. And I think, it's the best time to do that is right at the beginning when a smartphone is given out. So I think you have those conversations, a bit like, it's good to have conversations before you get married. Perhaps there needs to be a smartphone course, like a marriage. Just a thought. But equally, if your kids are well used to the phones and you think, gosh, it's getting a bit more tricky, perhaps you need to present them with data. This is the data. These are the studies which are showing that there are dangers here. We love you too much to allow you to sort of step blindly into the dark alley that you've just mentioned.
I think it's too easy to think, well, everyone's got one, so we better go with it, because what else can we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about being a Christian is you are the fish swimming in the opposite direction.
Yes.
The very least thing, God has designed us to live life abundantly. And there are, I think, like everything, there are wonderful things with mobile phones. There's wonderful things with money. There's wonderful things with sex. But all these things, computers, can be, mismanaged. And of course, that's what the devil loves, absolutely loves, taking something that's good and destroying it. So let's not play into his hands.
I think of these 4 points that you brought up, the one that makes me think this really is the one thing that could transform society better than anybody else is having schools that say you're not allowed to have a mobile phone across. You walk in the gate, you're not allowed to have a phone. Here's a tray, stick it in there. You're not having it while you're at school.
Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah. Quite
right. It would teach discipline. We don't like the word discipline, but we teach discipline is just understanding how to do something over and over again until it becomes a normal thing. That's all discipline is. Yeah.
And I know that some schools are doing that, but I'd love to see it in all schools. Just as a matter of, just as a norm.
Yes, I really think that would be so much better. But the other thing which I saw was, I actually wrote it down wrong. I think I wrote it down wrong in a good way, because I said more play, less phone. And actually, that's not quite what you said, but it got me thinking, rather than just saying, okay, let's take this off you. Well, it's like anything else. What are you going to give instead? What can you do as an alternative?
Absolutely. And that's why, when I see my drug addicts or alcoholics at work, I'm saying there's something better. I'm not just saying stop drinking, stop taking drugs. Here's something better, Jesus. You've got to have something better to offer. Actually, I had a lovely conversation with a patient about the other day. Comes in with his mum, absolutely shocking alcoholic in binges, was dry when I saw him. And I said, look, it's very difficult stopping alcohol because you tell me every 6 weeks, you're back on it again. What's going to change things? Then I said to his mum, do you know that I'm a Christian? She says, yeah, I thought you might be mentioning that. This is better. This is what you need. And he said, do you know, I've been thinking about this, and off we go. So I'm hoping and praying that he'll take what I said seriously, because otherwise, in himself, he's nothing like strong enough. Alcohol's a powerful enemy, but with God, that's different.
I was chatting to someone just this morning, which I'm not going to go into, and he had a really, really terrible past. I mean, it's some really horrible stuff, but God took all the really nasty stuff that none of us ever wants to think about happening and redeemed it. And now he helps people, not necessarily specifically with the stuff that he went through, but he's there to help others because he's been through it. And now he has a light to shine in the darkness. But if we don't, we can cover the light. What's that scripture about? Don't stick your light under the bottom of a cupboard, stick it on the top shelf so it can light the room.
Yeah. Well, how good is that? That's really good. And I think maybe, we should be shining in all areas of life. So as Christians, let's show people how to use a mobile phone well.
I will say that when I have a quiet time that goes well, sometimes they're better than others. They're not always brilliant. I don't have the amazing tongues of fire coming down. It's often just me reading the notes and thinking, on with the day. But sometimes if I have a really good one, it's because, and I do make a point of this, I turn the phone over. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it, because if I use the Bible app, which is brilliant sometimes, I prefer a Bible, a paper, a book, because it means I'm not distracted.
Yeah, no, and me too. Yes, I'll use, if I'm away from home and I've forgotten my Bible, yes, I'll look at it on my phone. But I'd prefer paper every day of the week.
Yes, me too. It's why I don't like reading on a digital screen doohickey. I much prefer a book. And good. I don't think I'm old-fashioned either. I think it's better. It's tactile, isn't it?
And also, to be honest, my great big thick life application Bibles gives me a whole load more notes. Yes, I could find them on the screen, but it's just there on a page. It's just easier. And as you say, it keeps the distractions, the temptations at bay.
Which is a good thing. Right. That'll probably do for that one. Thank you. We could go on in so many different tangents on this one. The Anxious Generation, that's an interesting book. Jonathan Haidt, Haidt.
Yes, The Anxious Generation.
That might be worth you looking up. And the 4 conclusions he came up with is no smartphones before 14, no social media before 16, a phone-free school. That would be amazing. Richard Knight, yes, vote for that. And then more play minus the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. Unstructured play minus the phone. Absolutely.
Just off the back of that, boredom. I saw something on boredom recently, which I think touches ever so slightly. We're in a generation where we've got to stop boredom for our children, but actually, boredom is such a great motivator for creativity that we would never have considered had we not been bored.
Yeah, no, very good. And I think you're right. If we suddenly we've got to do something all the time, that's not good for us. And then, of course, leads to shorter attention spans. Actually, being creative. I remember my mother-in-law used to say, "No, if you're saying I'm bored, no, that means that you're boring. The problem is you." Get up and do something is what she was saying. Don't just blame the situation. Oh, it's all terrible out there. No. Okay, what are you going to do with your time? Are you going to read a book? Are you going to do something? Are you going to create something? So, you just to say to the game, okay, what are you going to do? Up to you.
I don't have problems with boredom at the moment. It's kind of busy running a radio station. But in the past, when I found myself with a bit of a low time, I would go and clean a surface or mop a floor, because the simple mechanical process of just repetitively doing something that wasn't particularly complicated was so nourishing for the mind.
Very good. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Richard. Again, as ever, if you want to send questions to Richard about this subject or any other, if you've seen a topic in the news and you think, you know what, I would love to know what on earth this is on about, you can email those to us. hello@pure247radio.org. hello@pure247radio.org. And I'll put those to Richard and maybe we can answer them for you on the air. Richard, as ever, my friend, thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Did you know Pure 24/7 Radio has a shop? Well, we do. You can buy merchandise while supporting the work that we do here. Simply head over to www.pure247radio.org/shop. That's www.pure247radio.org/shop.